Aloha. I think we'll go ahead and get started. We may have a couple more people coming in the next few minutes. My name is Brianna Govea. I'm the curator of collections and programs here at the King Kamehameha V Judiciary History Center. If you've never visited Aliʻolani Hale before, we actually have a museum downstairs. And during our business hours, I highly encourage you to come back and see the changes we're making downstairs. Mahalo everyone for joining us in person and those on Zoom who are listening in on our conversation tonight. I want to thank our program partners, the Friends of the Judiciary History Center of Hawaii, the Center for Biographical Research at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and the Jonathan Napela Center for Hawaiian and Pacific Studies at Brigham Young University, Hawaii. While the remarks shared tonight don't necessarily represent opinions of the judiciary, I'd like to thank Chief Justice Mark Rechtenwald and the Hawaii Judiciary and Legislature for their continued support of our mission and for providing this beautiful venue for our discussion. Our honored guest tonight, who will be introduced in just a minute, call Hawaii, Samoa, and Micronesia home. We gather in the Supreme Court to discuss the impacts felt by communities across the Pacific experiencing occupation and militarization of their homelands by the United States. As we spend the next hour or so here in Aliʻolani Hale, I'd like us to keep in mind that we are sitting in the very location of the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, which occurred here on the first floor on January 17th, 1893. This past April 30th, we actually celebrated the 150th anniversary of Aliʻolani Hale's opening in 1874. This building's change in use after the overthrow, from the government building for the sovereign Hawaiian Kingdom to headquarters, temporary headquarters of American oligarchy, is just an example of one place connected to this extensive legacy of US imperialism in the Pacific. So I wanted to call attention to that and just for us all to be mindful of where we are. Moderating the discussion this evening is Megan Hardin, on my right, lecturer and PhD candidate with UH Manoa's Department of Geography and Environment. I met Megan almost exactly 1 year ago at a presentation she was giving about research she did in the Hawaii Congressional Papers collection. She spoke about the 1965 Pacific State Proposal, efforts of Senators Harum Fong and Daniel Inouye to incorporate a region known in the 1960s as the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands into the recently created state of Hawaii. This initiative, though unsuccessful, would have incorporated the Northern Mariåna Islands, Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands into the state of Hawaii. Tonight, we'll learn about the political structures of these and other regions as they exist today, how affected communities navigate ambiguous legal structures put in place by the US to maintain control, and what new futures are being advocated for. Before I turn it over to Megan and our panelists, a friendly reminder that we are recording this discussion on Zoom, and we will be leaving some time at the end of the program to take questions from our Zoom attendees, as well as you all here in person if you have anything to ask our distinguished community members and experts here with us tonight. So with that, I say mahalo, and Megan, thank you.
Aloha. Thank you, Brianna, for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I understand tonight is also Pacific graduation at UH Manoa, so very grateful that all of you made it here, and wishing the best for all of the graduates walking tonight in that. I am Megan Hardin. I am a recently defended PhD candidate in the geography. Oh, thank you. So I was just using that not to get applause, but to say that's why I'm so tired all the time. But yeah, very excited to be in conversation. When Brianna asked me to be a part of this panel, I was so thrilled to get to bring together all of these brilliant people and to be in conversation with them. So I am finishing my PhD in geography at UH Manoa. And as Brianna said, my research is focused on US imperialism in islands, and most recently, the militarization that's happening in the Republic of Palau today. But I'm not from Hawaii or the Pacific originally. I was born and raised in Oklahoma and moved here for graduate school a few years ago. And I have been very privileged to call Manoa home ever since. And with that, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists. So first, on the far end, we've got Dr. Line Cruz, faculty in Pacific Studies at Brigham Young University, Hawaii. We've then got Henderson Huihui, staff attorney for the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. Keone Williams, the Information and Publications Officer from the East-West Center's Pacific Islands Development Program. And Josie Howard, the founder and CEO of We Are Oceania. Yay. And so with that, we'll get the conversation started. So Brianna has prepared some fantastic questions for us to engage with tonight. We are also in no way bound to them. So, we'll use these as a starting point to get our conversation going. But if there's a different direction that you'd like to take the conversation in, if you have questions for one another or more pressing questions that you think we should be asking instead of these, please feel absolutely empowered to take them in whatever direction is best. And so with that, I guess let's kick off the discussion. So could you please each introduce yourselves, where you come from, and the work that you do? And we can start maybe with Line on the far end.
Can you hear me? Fatalofa atu ileo to paia, maleo to mamalu. My name again is Line Noe Memea Cruze. Line is what I go by. I come from the villages of Laie Malo'o and Laie Wai on the north shore of this island. Originally, my families come from the villages of Sapopali'i, Paikoloa, Paisala, and Manunu.
Could you tell us also a little bit about the work that you do?
Okay, by trade, I was just speaking with our lawyer here. It's a very distinguished sitting next to him, a little bit scared. By trade, I'm a planner from American Sāmoa, and while I was there, that is where I learned and informed the most for my book, which I am the first Samoan to write a book about land tenure in American Samoa and its correlations to globalization, imperialism, within American territories, both in the Pacific as well as the Caribbean. My book, The Pacific Insular Case of American Samoa, is dedicated to the work that I've done in practice while I was the first Samoan territorial planner in the American Samoan government in the Department of Commerce, as well as my doctorate studies that did ethnography and archival work at the US Congress, also in Germany, Aotearoa, New Zealand. Any military installation under America, all of the records are housed in San Bruno, where I've done research there as well.
Thank you.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Henderson Huihui. I am a staff attorney at the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. I grew up in the Waimanalo homestead, which helped to, I guess, put me on the direction that I am on today. I graduated from Kailua High School. I then went on to UH for undergrad and law school. And as I mentioned, I'm currently at the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. I first started there in summer of 2019 as a law clerk. I got to work on some really awesome things, particularly what was happening with Mauna Kea and the governor's emergency proclamation. I continued on in the spring, and around that time, I was awarded an Equal Justice Works Fellowship that allowed me to work at NHLC and focus on Hawaiian homestead issues for 2 years. So that includes lease cancellation defense, preparing educational materials for lessees and beneficiaries, and also providing assistance with successorship. And so after the fellowship concluded, I was able to stay on, and today I continue to focus on issues arising under the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, and I'm very honored and grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, welcome. No. Let me hold this. Welcome. Aloha, my name is Keone Williams. I'm born and raised here in Hawaii, but as is relevant for this panel, my mother emigrated from Chuuk, Micronesia to Hawaii in the early 80s before I was born. So I'm a diaspora child, so to speak, but born and raised and grew up here my whole life until just this year when I had the privilege of being able to go back to my mother's homeland and to connect with family and to connect with place. I currently work at the East-West Center. At the East-West Center, I work in the Pacific Islands Development Program. The East-West Center generally is known for building relations among people and nations focused on Asia, the Pacific, and the United States. The Pacific Islands Development Program within the East-West Center serves the people and nations of the Pacific through capacity building, interchange among regional leaders, and policy-relevant research. Thanks.
Thanks, Keone.
Lehapunalalim, Tirofairoami, Iti Soslin, Tirowan Pul, Tirowan Matau, Tirowan Armaha, Tirowan Anunefanu. My utmost respect to the host culture, to the spirit, to the land, to the ocean, to the sky. My name is Josie Howard, and I was born and raised on a small island called Onon, close to Satawan, where Papa Mao comes from. I know a lot of people probably know that. I came to Hawaii to further my education because there is no 4 years education in Micronesia or graduate program in Micronesia. I came to Hawaii in 1989, over 30 years ago, and I've been here ever since then. My first job is I am married. I have 3 children. 2 are studying at UH Manoa. 1 is still in high school. And I currently live in the Ahupua'a of Manana, which is known today as Pearl City. And my work. So we are Oceania. The mission of We Are Oceania is to empower Micronesians in Hawaii to navigate success. So our very first project was to open or launch a one-stop center. And the one-stop center is kind of like an idea of a canoe house where I come from, where when you come to a place, you're new to a place, you come to the canoe house first to get connected to the lineage, if you have any, or to the resources to the island. And you also learn how to navigate the island. So that's basically what the one stop and our hope for the one stop. We now also have a we have a youth empowerment center. So that's another part of our work that is really important. It's our work with our youths to guide them to also navigate success.
Wonderful. It is such a privilege to be up here with all 4 of you and to learn from you tonight. So I'll jump into the next question that Brianna has prepared for us tonight. And again, we can take this in any direction that you'd like. But this next question asks, in honor of tonight's theme about U.S. island imperialism, could you explain or discuss what U.S. island imperialism means to each of you in either the work that you do or in your daily lives or in general? And then also maybe the tools that you use to navigate or subvert some of the inequalities that emerge out of US imperialism. And anybody who would like to start can start. No pressure.
Well, I'll go first.
Great.
So when I think of US imperialism, I think of the perpetuation of distorted history and ideology that resulted in the deprivation of sovereignty for many, not just in the Pacific and Oceania, but the Native Americans on the continent. And so as like an example of that, what I always kind of think of how this is in effect is I remember when I was still in high school, I got into an argument with someone I know, a friend actually, about the US's history of imperialism, specifically how it related to Hawaii. And this person I knew, they grew up in an evangelical military family, and this is not to disparage either of those groups, but to provide some context as to where this person's thoughts come from. And so their response to my explaining, the history of the kingdom was manifest destiny and the need to evangelize and spread the word of God. I was really blown away at that time because someone had truly believed that it was destiny that my ancestors, their form of government, their inherent sovereignty should be taken away, done away with. That was destiny. And so when I hear American imperialism, I think of the continued use of resources, of militarization of this land. You know, we have one of the highest rates, I believe, out of all 50 states of military controlled land. And you know, these lands are leased for $1 a year. So that is my thoughts, what I think.
Thank you.
I think if I can just jump in, we received a laundry list of questions last night, and if you live in a home like we do in the North Shore, there's quite a few families that live on my compound, so my time is not my time. So forgive me if I'm going to read from some notes. When I thought about this question, I always think, and it's part of the reason why I don't speak first, as someone that is a guest here in Hawaiian Islands and Samoan culture, you don't speak first as a guest. You allow those that are the host people speak first, and then you speak second. So as I speak now, thank you very much, Henderson, for opening up the Talanoa. But I also want to thank Matt Matisse, the director of the Judiciary History Center and programs, for the thoughtful questions that are posed to us, and Megan for posing it. When I was a student at UH Manoa, one of the things that was taught to me and that I had very difficulty understanding as a Pacific woman and as a scholar, someone that was raised here as a guest in the lands of Hawaii, when I was going to Kuku High School, the only class that I learned about Pacific people within American domestic sphere was Hawaiiana. It was taught in 10th grade in the DOE system. And what it was taught was that Hawaiians were overthrown. They gave us a date, and it seemed as if Hawaiians did nothing in that overthrow. It seemed as if they just laid down and they were overthrown, and it was by agency and action, which the agency would be inaction. As a Samoan growing up here in Hawaii, that was my perspective going into UH Manoa. So when I was at Saunders Hall and I was learning new theories as a Pacific woman, I came across a book, and I always have it in my notes. The book is by John Watson. He wrote The Eastern Origin of Western Civilization, and he wrote 2 myths. And I agree with these 2 myths. In the West, they have gotten away with these 2 myths. The first myth, which goes into U.S. imperialism, is that in 1492, Europe were not in a right to new lands and claiming that they were discovering new lands and new people. That's the first myth. The second myth is that European industrialization was not because of their superior technology. It was because they were active militarism people that believed that they needed to command and then occupy. So those twin myths inform me that what I learned in secondary school at Pōhakuloa, those were myths as well. And in order for me to unshackle my mind of this imperialistic logic, which I organize myself within, I have to further educate myself to break free in terms of what they teach in formal American educational structures. The difference between the East and the West was that the West always believed they were superior. And I come to now know, as a mother and as a humanist, a political scientist, as a neighbor, as a friend, that these are myths. Why do I say that? To me, the language of imperialism has a history of contact in the Moana. Since I was in high school, the Pacific has gone through different iterations of languaging. First, it was the South Pacific. Then it was the Pacific Islands. Then there was a period where it went back to the South Seas. Then now there is a reclaiming of the Moana, moving away from what foreigners had called us, which the values go to that is we're small islands, we're remote, and we're little. What U.S. imperialism means to me and what I try to share in the spaces that I occupy with others is it represents unfreedoms. And the unfreedoms as a humanist and as someone that seeks for peace in myself and how I relate to others and seek for peace structurally is to recognize the unfreedoms, particularly in a space like this where I share in our different experiences in the world and different experiences of how the American imperial structures have created unfreedoms for us. And one of those unfreedoms is in education to teach us our history written by us, about us, for us, that situates America with us, not superior to us. And one of the ways that we can do that is to provide more truthful histories, but the voices has to be of the people in which these histories are written about. So one of the ways that I think I can navigate and subvert American imperialism and oppressive systems is to re-indigenize, and that would go into this imagined communities. A lot of times when you have conversations in 2024, one of the things that most Americans and most Western rational liberal people will say is a symbol of freedom would be citizenship. If only territorial citizens could have citizenship, they would be better off. You would be just like American citizens. I believe that is a red herring. A red herring trying to distract from the fact that the impoverishment in the territories come from unfreedoms and a financial, economic, and structure that makes us impoverished, that creates unfreedoms. To me, when someone brings about citizenship in a conversation, would every Kanaka Oiwi argue that because of American citizenship have given them more freedoms to be Hawaiian? In the territories, I believe the conversation around U.S. imperialism has been led by continental people that think they want and do no more than us, but never become allies with us. So as I waited for my Kanaka allies here, host to the lands in which I sit on to speak first, everyone wants to speak first. And I think there's a time and a place for the voices in order for us to decolonize the space in which we share. So that's what I think, and coming off Henderson. Mahalo kako.
Thank you so much for that. And if you have the opportunity to read Dr. Cruce's book, I highly recommend it because it is fantastic, especially in terms of the points you've just made.
So I'll continue. I agree with all that. When I think of island U.S. imperialism, I think of the USDA food that was introduced to us because we were a third world country. I think of the attitude and state of mind that things that I discover on the islands and that disregard the people who has been living and surviving, and that the island is part of who they are. I also think about the education system, which is predominantly to learn the Western history, Western leadership. I remember in college when I challenged my professor when we learn about Descartes and all the philosophers, and I said, how come I cannot learn about my own? I want to write about my own philosopher from my country. And I got a C in that class for doing that. But that's what comes to my mind. I think about nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands and disregarding the life of the people, again, that who has been living there, and that the island, the ocean is part of their health. And when this happened, that was destruction. Yeah, I think about myself when I was young, growing up on my island. I thought that we were untouchable, but I didn't realize that I was just living in a bubble, and that bubble can burst anytime there is conflict with powerful countries, and when the powerful countries are happy with each other, we're happy, and my bubble is messed with and it's not, in danger. I think about recently with the tension between North Korea and North Korea, China, Soviet Union, and even right now. I think about Guam being a territory and has military, and uh, Kwajalein with the ballistic missiles, and we are a target if there's World War III. Those are the kind of things that I think about.
Thank you.
Thank, thank you so much. I just echo everything that's been said. Oh my goodness, how do you follow a political science professor and all the wisdom that's on this table? But I'll just offer up observations. I guess what makes me unique on this panel is like I said, a diaspora child. So I think that's kind of the perspective that I can share and provide value for. My observations on island imperialism, I guess first and foremost, recognizing that to understand island imperialism, you need to understand empire, and then determining who's the empire within this conversation. I think the elephant in the room is that the empire is the United States of America. And when we talk about, or I mean, in this era, right, there's long histories. And so when we talk about island imperialism, we are referencing certain cultures kind of in relation to the United States of America. As a diaspora child, but also a US citizen, I'll preface everything by saying identity is multifaceted. We can be multiple things at the same time. I'm a US citizen, I'm a British citizen, and I'm an FSM national until I get my passport, then I'll be a so talk about all the empires, I guess, all the empires in FSM. But my observation, just growing up here, observing as the only US citizen in my family, really seeing that island imperialism to me is the creation of like in between, being stuck in between. And I know that the scholarship like says the word liminal spaces, or being this just like not this nor that. But I really think that that's a great way to describe the product of island imperialism, because it has created the in between between visible and invisible, even thinking just politically, represented and not represented, just something in between, right? Like, for example, FS COFA residents, I think is what the PC term is now, COFA residents, COFA citizens, can live, work, study in the US legally, but they can't vote. So it's, but you can call your representative, but you can't vote for them. For example, right, our neighbors in Guam, they have delegates in that U.S. House of Representatives, but they can't vote. They can just advocate, and they don't have a senator. They just have a U.S. representative or a U.S. delegate, technically. Same for American Samoa, just a U.S. delegate, non-voting member of the U.S. House of Representatives, no senator. And then also the in-between between citizen and alien. COFA citizens are not citizens of the United States, but they're not aliens either. They're lawfully residing. And I think it's in the in-between that you can easily become invisible, legally speaking. And that's when a lot of issues happen, because when laws ripple out from Washington, D.C., nobody's thinking about the invisible. When laws ripple out from beneath the Supreme Court, nobody's thinking about what about the in-between? What about those people who aren't aliens or who aren't US citizens? And it takes a lot of advocacy from all corners to really make those voices heard.
Thanks, Keone. Thanks, all. Before I ask a follow-up question, do you have questions for one another in regard to what was just raised, or comments that you want to expand on before I steer in another direction? Okay, great. So I'm diverting from the script. But you all mentioned something that related to me, the idea of sovereignty or self-determination, not in the kind of legal or political sense necessarily, although that might be a part of it, but in a more kind of embodied or lived experience. So Henderson, you talked about the degradation of sovereignty across islands as taking rights away from people, taking away the ability to steer their own futures. Dr. Cruz, you talked about unfreedoms and what that means in various contexts. Josie, you talked about the sense of being untouchable, but then that bubble being able to burst whenever so-called great powers decide that it's time for that bubble to burst. And then Keone, you talked about this in-between status, this invisibility, or this kind of space between being visible and invisible. So I just wonder, I'm going to call it sovereignty for lack of a better word here, but what does that mean to you? What does that sense of not necessarily being defined in terms of US imperialism, but what does that sense look for you individually, if you're willing to answer this question? If not, we can move to one that maybe was in your notes.
So this is my passion. So the whole sovereignty, I think discussing this in Hawaii, it's a really complicated and very painful issue, to be honest. And I want to say that I want you to know my intention when I speak. It is very limited. A lot of times when there's panels that speak about American territories, it's all in one breath, that they've all had similar experience and there's almost a sameness and a oneness. In my home, I teach my children, do not address yourself as a Polynesian. It confuses people to think that we are all the same. It also confuses yourself to believe that our ancestors come from an artificial space that does not exist. You are English, you are Tongan, you are Samoan, and you are German. You have to be specific. The way that this relates to this conversation is there is a oneness in the way that territories of America are seen, because America is such a new country to the nation state. Countries like France and England have long histories of nation state, have long histories of territories, have long blueprints and how that looks like in terms of its relationship in lands and peoples and rights and on freedoms. For America, its blueprint has been so haphazardous. Not even the Supreme Court can intelligently and articulate what that exactly is. For territories, when I speak about sovereignty, I speak to it from the territorial perspective, not from an external sovereign perspective, meaning most times when people speak about sovereignty, it comes from a legal, either you're a state in America or you're a non-state. As soon as you say that you are a non-state and you are a national, somehow language is put upon people like the American Sāmoa that they are second-class citizens. That comes from a very Western Eurocentric ideation that the only way you can exist in the American political sphere is to be a citizen like all continental citizens. I think that is a misstep and it's dangerous. The point of the flexibility of unincorporated territory and the idea of sovereignty is to exercise the freedoms by the consent of the people. What may be good for Guam or Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands in different oceans, in the Caribbean and in the Pacific in 2024 post-COVID, we are speaking to very distinct relationships with the United States. Each territory has overcome imperialism under different executive, different Supreme Courts, different legislative agendas. Because of these different histories, I think it's dangerous to call not sovereign because they don't have what you think they should have, or what the discourse, which is always an American discourse, is if you don't have what continental citizens have, then you don't have. I think it's dangerous because that kind of language is also very colonial, because what it articulates is Pacific people in the territories aren't intelligent enough to identify their own self-determination in what the people know to believe what is best for them, autonomy, whether it's political, whether it's educational, whether it's legal, whether it's economical. it is much more than a political and legal conversation. I could bring up food sovereignty. I could bring up the American being part of the World Trade Organization. I could bring in what that attaches to territories. But the point is, I think the conversation has to refer to consent and citizenry of the people that live in the territories. To me, that offers the most sovereignty to the people to recognize the distinct attributes historically within America's historiography of how it treats its Pacific and Caribbean citizens, with American Samoa being the anomaly as American nationals.
When I think about sovereignty, I think about like the way of life, and I think about that there's the dominant paradigm, uh, and there's also indigenous people, and I think to me sovereignty means that it's the honoring of one's being, and that one, and that people are able to see the world the way they see the world. Um, Let me back up a little bit. I love how you use citizenship, because when I look at citizenship and from my world, citizenship is not equivalent to anything in my way of life. In my way of life, we have clans, and we belong to clans. And our clans, where I come from, is matrilineal or matriarch. We follow our mother's clan. And with the work I do, I see the clash. When I do work with child welfare service, just for example, when it's time to place a child, the law says that when a child is being, there's a case open, the first step is to put the child back in the family, like immediate family or relatives, right? Um, and if there's no one that can take that child, then you go on to other steps, and the case can actually go to permanency, where the child may end up being adopted by another family. So when we talk about adoption, in our culture, we don't have adoption equivalent to the Western adoption. We have what is the Hawaiian hanai. But when families are told that your child is going to be adopted, they're thinking hanai. They're not thinking, I am stripped of my parental right, and this child is no longer mine. Because in the heart and in the mind of them, that child is theirs forever, because that child's clan, that child is connected to a clan. So citizenship can change if the child is adopted to like a Russian family. The citizenship change, but in our culture that never change. And our clan connects to the land, which determines our social status and our roles and responsibilities in society. So this is where I truly believe that when I think about sovereignty, I think about these systems that have sustained people for years and for millions of years in their existence in this world, and that there's a need to honor those systems, because this is who we are. This is our identity. I'll stop here.
Thank you.
Just building off of what is said, I think I guess a synonym would be like self-determination to sovereignty and independence as well. And I would just offer that I think in some spaces we think of self-determination within like the nation state as like having a vote at the UN. And I think I just posit that in terms of like, it's also the sense of having a seat at the table, but then again, it's a seat at whose table? And then also thinking through like, are you on equal footing, right? That gives you a sense of self-determination, but on equal footing with with who and who's setting that as well. I just posit these as like these are some of the questions around self-determination that I have for myself, and I'm still sorting through. And yeah, I just kind of echo what I said and then add those as my thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Keone.
So my perspective of sovereignty is, I'm an attorney, so it's definitely shaped or looked through the legal lens, but also through, my experience as a Native Hawaiian. And I cannot speak for the entire Native Hawaiian community on what sovereignty should look like or is. We are not a monolith. And there are varying views of what sovereignty is and how to accomplish that. For some, that is the complete restoration of the Kingdom of Hawaii. For others, that is a government-to-government relationship similar to those Native American tribes on the continent. For others, they feel that the status quo is fine and that through our current form of government, through the state, we have sovereignty. And so what I ultimately envision for the Native Hawaiian community in terms of sovereignty is the ability for us not just to survive in our ancestral lands, but to thrive socially, economically, culturally, to have the ability to and the authority to manage our resources in a manner that is appropriate to us. There's so many examples that I can point to as how, if we had a say in that particular event, things might have been differently. If Native Hawaiians had a seat at the table, a meaningful seat at the table, years ago in regard to Red Hill, would this spill have actually happened? We have the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act or the Hawaiian Homes Trust lands. We don't have the most input into how the trust is managed, how trustees are appointed. Trustees are appointed by the governor and confirmed by the Senate. Of course, the Senate does consider citizen testimony, but they could say, 400 beneficiaries of the act did not want this person as a trustee, but I want them to be. So our voice in that does not matter. We have the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, a trust fund set up for the betterment of the condition of Native Hawaiians that, trustees, since Rice versus Cayetano, are voted for by all citizens of the state. And so those who are not a beneficiary of these resources have a say in how these resources are managed, what these resources should be used for. It just, there are other examples of being able to exercise a form of sovereignty. So, along those lines of the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act and of OHA, the Homestead Act, it defines who is a beneficiary. So that's, you have to be 50% Native Hawaiian, or as the Act defines, not less than 1/2 of the blood of the native races that inhabited the islands prior to 1778. We don't get to define who gets to participate in this program, who gets to be a lessee. Successors under this program, they have to be a minimum of 25%. One thing that, my family and I, we just are over the 25%, me and my siblings. So whoever gets our family homestead, if we want to keep it in the family, they have to make sure they have a child with somebody who can make the child, reach 25% unless the blood quantum is changed. So having the ability to determine our own future, to control our own resources is what I envision.
Thank you all so much for those really insightful responses. Before I move on to the next question, I just want to make sure we have space again if there are follow-up questions amongst the panelists or follow-up points that anybody would like to make. Okay, great. Oh,
Sorry, I just wanted to
please,
say something.
please.
So as a guest here in the archipelago of Hawaii, one of the things that I try to do in my own space when you're speaking about sovereignty, just today in a class I had said, what does local mean? When you bring up equal footing, I push back at this idea of equal footing because every time you argue for equal footing, there is an erasure. In my home, I teach my children, do not use the language of local. To me, as a guest here, it erases kanako iwi. When you create a language that creates equal footing in an occupied state, in the political nexus that is, where is the kanako iwi when you create, I'm local? Is it the same equal footing than your kanako iwi neighbor? So when you say you're an ally, which I am, I'm also careful in the language that I use. I'm also careful in the sensibilities of those that I want to create allyship with, that I want to establish trustful, reciprocated relationships of respect. I think when I do that in my personal life, that when I come into my public life, I am an authentic, truthful person. And my mirrors will be my children, that when they are asked or when they're in the community and they're walking to Laie Park and everyone's saying, oh, I'm local, I'm from here and there, my children will have enough courage to identify themselves as, we are someone, we go to Puerto High School, we are not one. To me, that is a sense of being an allyship to dispute how sovereignty and how this equal footing language can be hurtful in our personal spaces, while it just may be a little walk or a little bicycle ride to the park.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to shift in the interest of time to a discussion on militarism and militarization. This is something that has been, kind of a foundation for U.S. island imperialism here in Hawaii, in the Federated States of Micronesia, in Samoa, across the Pacific and beyond. So I guess, Henderson, you mentioned Red Hill and how, the trajectory of Red Hill leaking jet fuel into Oahu's aquifers could have been different had Hawaiians had more of a say. We've also got RIMPAC upcoming this summer, where the US and I think like 25 other militaries will be playing war games in Hawaii's water. So I guess just on the topic of militarism, militarization, how have each of you seen U.S. militarism impact either your communities or communities that you are in, or places that you are in, and yeah, kind of just what are your thoughts on those?
Since the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, right, that was assisted with the U.S. military. The overthrow probably would not have had the success if the U.S. military did not, in violation of international law, set up outside of Iolani Palace. So that's kind of where the start of I think things are in terms of the presence of the military in Hawaii. But again, there are just too many examples of how the military's presence here has impacted these islands, how it has impacted Native Hawaiians and our ability to stay in this land. They're, in addition to one of Oahu's main aquifers being potentially poisoned for the rest of eternity, these islands have been scarred by bombings for target practice. The famous or infamous example would be Kaho'olawe, where the military just used an entire island for target practice. There was a simulation of a nuclear bomb that was done on Kaho'olawe. I think around 500 or so tons of TNT were exploded, and that explosion was so large that it cracked the cap rock of the island and exposed the aquifer to the ocean. And so now the ability, for anyone to inhabit Kaho'olawe is greatly affected. There are UXOs and other um, um, artillery that are just littered amongst Kaho'olawe. But it's not just Kaho'olawe. It's everywhere. It's all of these islands. We have Makua Valley that there are UXOs and Native Hawaiian cultural practitioners have to enter into an agreement to be able to access important cultural sites that are in the valley because it's controlled by the military. They have to be careful where they walk because there are UXOs in this area. We have them in the mountains and the beaches. I remember my youngest siblings one day they came home from elementary school and they came home with a packet of what to do if you find or you think you found a UXO. And it had cute little cartoons, a cartoon dog, and it's very cutesy. But looking back, it's crazy. Where else in the US would it be normal for a young child to have to learn how to be safe because they have encountered an unexploded ordnance at the beach or while they're hiking? And so that's what I always think of in terms of the effect of the military's presence here.
Thank you.
So for Micronesia, I would say everything. And my grandparents, my parents were born in 1942. If we remember 1942, the war started out. World War II was, I think, happening around that time. I think so. My parents lived through the World War II. Chuuk was a war zone, and I would say Micronesia was a war zone. Why? Because the Japanese were in Micronesia. Uh, they were in Palau, they were in Tarawa, they were in Saipan, they were in Guam, they were in Chuuk, all over even my small island, that remote island. We have a part of the island called Kansoku. I don't know what it means, but it was occupied by the Japanese. I have six aunties who are married to Japanese, so I have uncles who are half Japanese. So my parents lived through World War II, and when the United States took over the caring for our nations, or when United Nations gave United States the responsibility to help us rebuild after World War II, a lot of like my mother's and my grandparents, they were so hopeful that we and our children will never see a war again. Well, I know that's not true. And with the tension now, anytime if Guam gets a whatever, like a bomb hit Guam, we're right next to Guam. We will be affected. Our relationship, the Compact of Free Association, is basically based on militarization because of our strategic location. Um, the impact is just a lot. Our tuna fish, like the rennet dome, which is cracking with climate change, the rising of sea level, uh, they believe that that will contaminate, the ocean and our tuna fish. It's a migrating fish. We share the tuna. That's why there's a tuna commission in the Pacific. So it's not only going to affect us; it's going to affect everybody around. And yeah, like it's just almost everything. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Just wanted to add something as well. Um, the U.S. military, they always, I guess, advertise that it's great for the military to be there and have their presence wherever it is, whether it be here or other islands in the Pacific, because they're able to protect these island communities from the horrors of other countries. Now, I'm not sure if everybody remembers the 4th of July a number of years ago, where North Korea had threatened that they were going to launch a missile to Hawaii. It wasn't DC, it wasn't LA, it wasn't New York City, it was Hawaii. Why? Because of our strategic location for the United States, because of Pearl Harbor, because of the military installations. That would not have been a threat if the US were not here. And same with the other island communities, is they have become, despite the military saying, we are here to protect you, you don't have to worry, their presence has made them a bullseye for the US's adversaries.
And in the meantime, we see so many environmental degradations already happening before North Korea even before any of that happens. Keone, Dr. Cruz, did you want to add anything to this conversation of militarism?
Again, forgive me for my notes, but this is a pretty big topic. I think in the two oceans that America has territories or outposts, there are distinct conversations of a military buildup. Which military branch, in which history, and what context are you speaking to? I think every territory and its citizenry would answer this question differently, and I want to give two examples. Well, I'll start with my own. When we lived in American Samoa, my children went to school in the village of Tafuna. In Tafuna is the international airport. On the road where my children went to school, on one end of the road, it is the PX. At the other end of the road, across the street, it's the military training. Forgive me if it's the wrong term, where all of the Army goes and they train. We have then left, and here when we moved back to Hawaii, since that time, right next to my children's elementary school is a live fire installation where Army servicemen and servicewomen go there and they shoot live fire. It's the craziest zoning I've ever understood in my life. Next to one is an elementary school, and it abuts land. Actually, it shares boundaries with Tafuna High School. Right there next to these two schools is an Army firing infrastructure. Sorry, I don't know the proper military term, excuse me. The military buildup, each territory in the oceans are very different, and this is the difference. For American Samoa, its footprint is very small. Could it be strategic purposes? Could it be secret purposes? That we'll never know. I would say the latter. But when you think about military buildup, I think about Guam, actually. 8,600 Marines are going to be transferred from Okinawa to Guam. In Guam, I had to look, where are they transferring to? According to the military website, they're going to be transferring to a land which they acquired. It's called the Northern Mariåna Islands, similar to the island of Palau. It is the only water source. The military, American military, will now have three branches of military in Guam. It will have the Air Force, it will have the Navy, now it will have the Marine base. In terms of Tinian, 2/3 of the island, if you live in Oahu, this should bring up an imagery since we see it around here as well. 2/3 of the island of Tinian is a military airfield, oil. It is sacred land where now 2/3 of the island, its uses will be for covert and overt military operations. The installation will bring, like anyone that's lived in any huge military buildup, trucks, service individuals, it will bring in supplies. On one side, if you were a family, you had a small business and you provided services, this is a huge boon to your family-run businesses, which are businesses in the territory. run. But on the other side, it brings about green crimes. How are you going to address green crimes when most of the territories, governmental operations, if you've been reading the GAO reports, are mostly grant and aid? How does that balance out on high quality of life when you look at the United Nations Human Index? Is everyone there having a healthy and happy life? I don't know if anyone can answer that, but I think if the military starts to build up where you have land uses that are 2/3 of the island, could you ever have an index in any language that will ever produce a creative output where the citizenry that lives there are happy and healthy? Based on the knowledge and the data that we have, I don't think you can have any measurements or any data that could produce such a report if 2/3 of the island is being used for military operations. I'm going to stop there.
I think I'll add to just so much has been said, but I just wanted to flag a couple news headlines. Part of my job is flagging news headlines from across the Pacific, so these are a couple that I rounded up today. So Indo-PACOM announced that they want to build a national security office in the Federated States of Micronesia. They're investing in an airport extension in Yap. Boeing was granted a $460 million contract to build a missile defense system on Guam. And also $15 billion is being allocated for military construction across Micronesia, most likely mostly in Guam as well. And I just share that as kind of examples of kind of what has been discussed on this panel. More specifically, these are examples are FSM as well, but just to provide illustrations of what this looks like today as well, in addition to the legacies.
Thank you all. We are somehow already approaching the end of our time. So we've got maybe 5 to 10 minutes of discussion left before we open it up for about 15 minutes of Q&A. So with this last question, I'll propose a question, but again, feel free to take it in any direction. If you'd prefer to wrap up in another way, that's fantastic as well. So in the context of all of these impacts of militarization and these ongoing practices, what are some of the ways that you have seen people resisting or fighting back or otherwise responding to this in ways, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
So again, speaking from Native Hawaiian's perspective, I think there are like 3 main tools that I've seen the Hawaiian community use to advocate for environmental justice, to push back on what's happening, and that is legal action, resistance and protest, and political pressure. So, as an example of legal action, so the state leases Pōhakuloa to the military, and that's on Mauna Kea. It's beautiful up there, but they have live fire ammunition trainings up there as well. And so part of the state's lease to the military includes certain provisions such that the military must make every reasonable effort to remove and deactivate all live or blank ammunition upon completion of a training exercise or prior to entry by the public, whichever is sooner, and to prevent unnecessary damage to or destruction of vegetation, wildlife, and forest cover, geological features, and related natural resources. The state did not ensure that the military was complying with those terms. And so the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, on behalf of a group of Native Hawaiians, in the case Ching v. Case, NHLC argued that the state has a fiduciary duty as trustee, leasing these lands to the military to monitor their compliance with the terms of the lease. This Supreme Court agreed with the Circuit Court's finding that the state breached its fiduciary duty, that the state did not take reasonable steps to monitor the military's compliance, to monitor and make sure that the military was cleaning up after their exercises. And so, these leases, these military leases, they're currently up for renewal, and that's something that's being discussed today. And what the Hawaiian community, or just the community at large here, is doing is mobilizing and voicing to either the leasing of these lands to the military, or more specifically, the $1 a year lease term. Another example I think of is Koho'olave. Very, very inspiring, and it's just one of those things that you look at and you're just like, wow, that's crazy. Is that something that I could do? Probably not. I don't think I have that sort of courage in me to take such a bold stance. So, in the 1970s, George Helm, along with others in what has now become the Koho'olave Nine, they occupied the island while it was being used for target practice, while it was being bombed. They occupied the island to prevent further bombings. But what they also did was they used the law. They filed a lawsuit against the Navy, and the court agreed and required that the Navy do an environmental assessment of their bombings. And, through all of those actions, through protest and resistance and political pressure and legal pressure, what ended up happening is in 1993, the Navy returned control of the island of Koho'olave to the state, and the federal government appropriated money for that cleanup. Of course, there is still a great deal of cleaning up that needs to happen. We have Red Hill, Kapukaki, legal actions there where state law was used against the military. And so, a contested case hearing before the hearing officer in the Department of Health, was taking evidence and making a decision against the military, which they tried to fight, but then later, they backed down from saying that they were going to appeal that decision. And in essence, they submitted to the jurisdiction the decision made through state law.
Thank you.
I'm so entranced. That was a very comprehensive answer. I completely forgot your question. I want to be honest.
I was
Megan, could you again?
Yep. Just asking about the ways that you've seen or the possibilities that you see for fighting back against these impacts of militarization or militarism itself.
Oh, militarism.
I can go.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually, what I'm going to bring up is not answering your question. It's concern with your question being raised, and I think you only touched upon that. I think for Micronesia, my concern is that history is going to repeat itself. Marshall Islands, a lot of the islands people have been displaced because of nuclear testing. And when we look at the Federated States of Micronesia, in the attempt for Compact 3, I see that the Marshall Islands put in measures to at least fight back, like get some more compensation for the loss of land and those kind of things, which were all shut down. Now, for the FSM, it's a totally different story, and that's why I'm concerned because I'm afraid that we're heading there. We are heading to, now there's more presence of military. We may not see that, or I don't know if our leaders are looking at that, but I'm totally, aware of that and following that movement. I think for a lot of people, they think, oh, this is great because you're coming in to save us from China. I think they're both dangerous. Like I said, it's bringing war to us, and it's also strengthening the military presence and militarization of our islands, which will lead to hurting our lands, hurting our health, more health problems, more medical problems, all of those things. So I think I'm more concerned than, sorry, to answer your question, that's what's on my mind.
Still on militarism?
If you'd like to be, otherwise we can transition to Q&A with the audience. So it's
We could transfer.
okay, fantastic. Let's go ahead. We've got then about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. Yes.
Hi, my name is Santiago. I'm from Puerto Rico. Mariana Novares and I are here for a conference and we found out about this activity. And so much of what you said resonates. When I think of imperialism, I think of sugar-beet monoculture, destroying the local potential for self-sustaining agriculture, exporting financial for and austerity because it's being those harming people that's leading to mass exodus. And some people call it blindization. As to, I mean, just so many things that you said that are, very similar to our situation. With the issue of militarization, of course, we've had a very big presence and still have a very big presence. In my town itself, 1/3 of the territory is Commonwealth and ambiguous. And although there's no longer a live military practice that people demands our residents, it is a situation where the military, these are obviously still ours. For example, they were rebuilding the facility in a way that takes much of the complex. Say that I
Just to tack on, I think green crime is something that we haven't addressed. And I think a great deal, I think a lot of allies here, particularly at the law school, have written a lot about reparation justice and how that may look like with territories and their health, and how in military covert operations, in its pollution, but also in its intergovernmental pollution with other governments, bringing it in aside of physical material directly related military installations. There's also services and governmental support to that. So I think another issue that hasn't been addressed here is green crime and how each territory is addressing that.
Aloha mai kako, Oval Ron Williams Jr. A question kind of for everyone in the panel. I know because of the structure we have a limited amount of time, so we didn't get really to one of the topics that I think is central to imperialism, and that is language. My kumu, Dr. Hanani Kitrast, used to say, they've done this for thousands of years, they've perfected it. The first thing you do is get rid of a people's language, right? And so here in Hawaii, that played out not only in 1896 with the banning of language from schools, but also to today. In 1976, the state constitution made Hawaiian an official language of the state. It's supposed to be an equal language, and we all know it's far from it. My daughter attended Kulakai Punio Anuenue in Pololo, right, the immersion school in Pololo, where about 75% of the students come from Waianae and are bussed out. And the DOE says, well, since you're choosing to go to school not in your district, you have to pay for busing. Well, there's no school there. So those types of issues about language and imperialism, I'm super interested in hearing what you guys have to say about that.
Yeah, I think the question was about the role that language and control of language has in imperialism. Is that, yeah. So maybe how you've seen the control of language play out in your the people you work with or in your own communities.
Yeah, it's through language that we see and interact with our world. It informs our perspectives of things. So you take away a language, you are taking away a piece of that culture, a world view. And so, it's much more easier to assimilate peoples if they don't have their native language, and like so many people, so many Native Hawaiians, I I did not grow up learning my native language. My dad did not. His mother, my grandma, did not, and that started, with my great grandmother when she was in school, and she was, disciplined for speaking her language, and she grew up and she had to relearn her language and her culture, and it's with the revitalization of Olelo Hawaii. We had the cultural renaissance and everything that came from the 1978 Con and everything like that, but you know there definitely is still a lot to do in terms of actually recognizing Olelo Hawaii as an official language in the state. Yeah, the state is, putting on its letterhead and its websites, the Olelo Hawaii version of what a department might be or a position, but that's not enough. And so, um, what I know members of the Richardson Law School has done, members of our firm, which I'm very proud to say, so at the law school recently, the first law review article in Olelo Hawaii was published. So it's completely in Hawaiian. One of our staff attorneys at NHLC, he has a master's in Hawaiian language, and so he brings that unique and amazing perspective to our work, and it informs how he views things. It informs his analysis. So when he looks back at documents, land grants and things like that are in Hawaiian, he's able to, bring out what the intent of something might have been, something that a simple translation that if someone were to give me a translation and then I look at that translation, I'm not able to get the full meaning from that, and so he's published an article in Kawaiʻola Oha's newspaper in Olelo Hawaii, as well as in English. So I think just those sort of not necessarily grassroots movements, but those kinds of small things I think are really big, but there definitely is a lot to do. There definitely needs to be more advocacy for the state, the Department of Education, to fund Hawaiian immersion schools, kaya puni schools, and that is something that our firm has advocated for in the Clara Ball case.
Thank you.
I just want to add, I mean, I really like your question because, one of the questions we didn't address in here is what are some ways to fight this kind of the militarization or imperialism, which I really think it's hard to do today. I mean, the Marshall Islands attempted, they couldn't, but I see the answer in culture, and language is with language. And the way we see it is when someone does not know their language anymore, we literally call them they're outsider, they're Americanized or Americans. They're no longer from the culture, and it goes to show this: the more cultural knowledge you have, the more stronger you can stand and withstand this foreign imposed ways that come your way. So yeah. And I know there's an attempt here. There's a Chuki school that just started to bring back, and the church is also doing a really good job in doing that with the kids, teaching them, the church stuff in the language so that they can learn the language again.
I think for language, I'm going to move it into the territories, if you don't mind. For the Department of Education, for elementary and secondary schools, in order for you to receive your fiscal year funding, you create 2 consolidated grants from each territory. Those 2 consolidated grants from each insular area goes through the clearinghouse, which is the insular area. But what a lot of people don't know is it's typically a reimbursement. you have to have your government coffer has to have enough money for your elementary and secondary schools. So that means if your language is part of the curriculum, but your government doesn't have that coffer, it hasn't got its taxes, it hasn't got all of the other percentage from the hospital, whichever revenue is going to feed it, and then reimburse that, it becomes a struggle. Which program, which curriculum set do you want to feed first? It becomes a battle of what is most advantageous to you, creating a certain score so those children then could come here for university for a 4-year. I think language is sacrificed like the arts and humanities oftentimes in the territories because government coffers don't have enough at the consolidated grant time for the reimbursement. And that is also just for our families that do business, that provide services to the DOE. It's very hard to work with the DOE in the territories because you never know when you're going to get your voucher paid. So I think if our insular areas were to look at this question of language or look at which curriculum sets are territorial citizens and nationals not scoring high, they would look at this insular areas, higher secondary schools, create a flexibility system when you know government coffers don't have enough before the school year begins in August. I think that would be a more astute and more critical analysis to address the lack of funding that extends beyond language. It could even go into more subjects. Mahalo kako.
Okay, kunuia lai kuku ka boi ka holi I ke kane. O ka he malie ho pili kawa hine. No pulawa. Iri malie nani halo halo aloha. I'm standing here on behalf of the youth of Hawaii. You know, our children are our future. And when you said they have to stand up and they have to know who they are, whether Samoan, Tongan, Hawaiian, Filipino, we have that mixed culture here. And we just started up a youth program that we bring up our kids and we want to teach them who they are. And when you said that they have to know where they come from and who they are, I think that's one of the biggest things that my board has come up with, that we take each of these kids and we find out what they're good at. And we nourish that. And with that, they're going to become the people on this panel in 20 years, because we're going to raise them to understand who they are, to understand how important they are, and to know that this aina, the aina that they live on, the aina that they come from is important. And one of the things that we're doing is, because we're in an American world, unfortunately, we have a Lego program. So we teach the kids the rainbow in Hawaiian. We have them build a little person that they are. We ask them where they come from. And then we have a map that they're going to put their little person that they made on that map so they know where they come from. I think that's very important. I want to thank you for saying that. And you teach your children who they are, and they're not just local. They're important. They're from this aina. And so I just wanted to say mahalo and thank you for standing up for all of us.
Keone, did you want to add something on to the question of language?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a quick story. It was earlier this year when I finally made it to Chuk, and we're driving down a very bumpy road, and I was asking my cousin, like, teach me some good phrases, because I'm going through a bit of a cultural renaissance myself. I do know how to speak Portuguese. But it was through that conversation that I found out that they didn't know how to spell certain words in Chuukese. And I said, "Oh, don't you learn that like in kindergarten before you, like, or like in preschool before you learn English?" And they're like, "No, Head Start is in English. Like, we learn English first." And I was like, "Oh, so at what grade do you learn Chuukese?" And they're like, "We never learned Chuukese." like reading and writing. We just speak it to each other. And I was like, I flew here to learn how to speak Chuukese, and you're telling me you don't know how to spell in Chuukese? He's like, well, some people know. The people who study it, they know how to spell the words in Chuukese, but not all of us know. And I think it just speaks to what you're saying. And I was shocked because I'm like, here I am on the land, ready to learn. And yeah, so anyway, just kahea, whatever he said and everything that has been said on this panel, just like, wow. I will add to that, being in Chuuk and seeing the Chuukese specifically used in practice really gave me a sense of pride in the culture, because I began to think this is a functioning language. A whole government runs on this language, and it instilled a sense of pride and connection to land and connection to my culture and heritage that I did not feel, because here in Hawaii, I mean, what pragmatically, what are you going to use Chuukese for? In fact, people will look down on you for speaking Chuukese, especially in a public school. So yeah, just the change of positionality and everything was really refreshing. So I'll just share that as a small story.
Thank you. And then I think we have a couple of questions. It is 7 o'clock, so we've got maybe 5 minutes of cushion time, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Rachel Wong. I just really wanted to thank all of the panelists. Thank you for speaking truth and shining light in such inclusive ways for all of us here and those on Zoom. I'm taking another angle into language. Dr. Cruz, you talked about the importance of language and how external forces or people have named swaths of geographic area and people and places with different changing names. Kyoki, you talked about what's the PC term now, right, to describe peoples. And I was wondering if it might be helpful for us to walk out of here with better understanding of the areas, the places that you talk about. Josie, you've talked about with Micronesia, it's 3 different nations, and within the Federated States of Micronesia, it's not a homogeneous set of islands or people or languages. And Dr. Cruz, can you also speak to, just so we walk out of here, American Samoa, I mean, so we know where people come from. Thank you.
So American Samoa, I'm not really quite sure the context, but in terms of American territories, American Samoa just generally, it is an anomaly. It's the only unorganized, unincorporated. American Samoans are US nationals. And so I think just really quickly, if you compare American Samoa with the other 4 inhabited American territories, it is the only territory that has resisted federalism. It is the only territory that has not wanted a closer relationship with America by the consent of the people in American Samoa. It is not taking the route that Puerto Rico or Guam has taken. There was a period where territorial residents thought that if you became a Commonwealth covenant or had that political and legal relationship, somehow it would create an outside quagmire. You wouldn't be in the federal territorial space. Somehow it might create a closer federalism relationship in the territorial status. Over decades, they found out, no, it did not. You're absolutely in the same space that you were just with citizenship. In terms of American Samoa, it doesn't have a federal court. It regulates its own customs and immigration. They are not US citizens. If you look at them now and you look at them 100 years ago, they are still able to speak the language like Samoans, even though they have multicultural citizenry in American Samoa. So I think its political status as being US nationals and resisting federalism, even though all the other territories have wanted a closer relationship in American Samoa, the resistance has always been for the twin cornerstone values, which is part of language, Fa Samoa, and its customary lands. Looking at the history which we have had, looking at Cuba, the Philippines, the other 4 territories and Hawaii, the pathway has not led to its native people having any more happiness to act in the ways that they would as a native people. So the resistance in American Samoa is not wanting to have equal footing. That is never and will probably never be the goal. The goal has always been being Samoan, acting like a Samoan, where you have Samoans that run the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative. The resistance to federalism has created an outcome where they are exactly where they want to be. And that's why self-determination and autonomy is are important principles of democracy to me, to create a world that you are happy to be in. So I think for American Samoa, that would be the distinction between all other territories historically, those that are also independent states today, like Palau and the others that I mentioned.
Anyone else like to chime in?
To explain, like,
Sure, I guess more specificity, I think, was the question.
okay, so I'm trying to figure out like how to explain it in a better way. So Micronesia is like Polynesia, and within Micronesia there are about 7 nations, right? And there's Kiribati, there's Nauru, there's the Republic of Palau, Republic of the Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, Mai, which is Saipan, and Guam. So I come from Chuk. Chuk is part of the Federated States of Micronesia. The right after World War II, there was a trust territory of the Pacific nations that were built, and that was Mai, Chuk, Palau, Marshall Islands. There's 6 of them. Help me out. Yeah. What is the other one? Pohnpei. Koshrai was never a state, so Koshrai was part of Pohnpei at that time. The goal was kind of like, I guess, kind of like we're supposed to help us get back on our feet and gain our sovereignty, but the leaders at that time start figuring out that that wasn't the direction, so they had to proactively come up with a way to sustain our sovereignty to our land and to our to our land, especially to our land, because of our clan system and how we connect with the land. So they came up with a very new idea of compact of free association, while the United States was pursuing for Commonwealth. So the Northern Marianas decided they're gonna go for Commonwealth. The Marshall Islands decided they want to do their own thing. They want to be on their own because of the nuclear testing and all that. So they separate themselves. CNMI separate themselves and became Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas, and then Marshall Islands became the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and then also Palau decided they don't want to stay within that group, and they wanted to split off. Now, the leader at that time, his vision was the imperialism picture, I guess he was aware of. And he knew that if they stick together, they will have a stronger voice. Divided we fall, united we stand. And he tried his best to keep everybody together, but everybody wanted their own thing. So that was left with Yap, Chuk, and Pohnpei. So then they created what's called the Federated States of Micronesia, and then now they make it 4 states. So they make us right, the 4th state. The system is exactly the same model of the U.S. system, where we have a president, we have congresses at large, and then we have each state. So Chuk State, Pohnpei State, Yap State, and Koshrai State. They each have their governors, and they also have their what do you call it, senator, like legislatures and all that. And then we have mayors on the island. So it's very much resemble the U.S. system. However, in the bigger the national government, they have a 4th branch, and that was the traditional chief. They created that so that the traditional chiefs still have the voice, because we come from a culture that the chiefs makes the call for the usage of land, because they're the ones who own the lands, most of the lands, or they make the call on their islands. Okay, that's really complicated. Now, within this Federated States of Micronesia, there's multiple cultures, like different languages. Chuk and State is a good example. Kioni and I come from Chuk, but I come from Monon and he comes from Metsitu. And um, I say Metsang and he says medicine. That's all of us. Yes, medicine. So we have different dialect, and sometimes you may not understand me. So even Chuk itself is very diverse. Chuk literally means mountain. I come from an atoll, so I never knew that I was Chukis. I was forced to be Chukis when I was in school because we have to be Chukis, Panapins, like all of that. So, but culturally and identity-wise, I know that I come from Sand Island. So that's what they call us, Fanapi people. Like literally means, Fanapi is like island, Sand Island. Yeah, and Chuk is mountain. Does that answer the question a little bit? Yeah. That was
Thank you.
quick.
That's a lot of history in a very short period of time. Well done. And I guess one more question and then we'll have to end it.
Aloha, my name is Ikaika. First off, thank you for being here. I wanted to share an experience I had while I was in the military. I served 6 years in the United States Navy. And each time before we deployed, we'd stop in Hawaii, deploy, come back to Hawaii, and then come back to California. Every time we pulled into Hawaii, we'd have a thing called trash call, where we take the trash from the boat and dump it on the pier. What most Navy boats do is called night ops, where we dump it into the ocean. And it really frustrated me because this is my home. And I made it a point to everybody on the boat that if anybody throws trash, like I'm gonna show you what Hawaiians are about. So I slept in the trash room to make sure nobody threw trash overboard. My question to you is, what do we have in place to prevent this? Because not every boat has, a Hawaiian on board that's gonna stop people from throwing trash into the ocean.
That's a really good question. I think, that's news to me. I did not know that. So my best guess is that there is nothing in place to prevent that. And I would have to imagine that the state's position, if they needed to take like a legal stance on this, would be exactly what they did with Pōhakuloa. Is we don't have, we trust the military. We trust them to regulate themselves and to do what's right. So that's very alarming to me, and something definitely needs to be done. So thanks for bringing that to our attention.
I'm gonna attempt to answer that. So it's about the ocean, right? And it's about Oceania. And I had the experience of thinking about this at one point. I don't know if we all know that there's a mining that is happening right below Hawaii, and kind of like so. There are Native Hawaiians who are looking into mo'olelo of who is the chief of the ocean. And because in international law, that's the only way we can tackle this. It's who owns the ocean, who makes the decision on the ocean. If we look into culture, like indigenous culture, and the relationship, like a lot of indigenous people like us, we have relationship with the ocean, with nature, with spirits, and with all that. And our creation stories talk about those things. And I just was fortunate. I don't know if you remember, but at our program, we are Oceania. We have a youth summit, and in 2023, we invited the master navigator to speak to the youths, and he spoke about navigation, and he spoke about the chiefs and the cons, like who calls the people, and it was through that speech that I learned that in our culture, the navigator is the chief of the ocean. So I think that's something to to learn more about and to to bring to reality and to practice it. So I think we have a position to also influence international law. I know that for me, even when I say the word international law, I'm thinking it's so far away and it's outside of my realm. But I think we make that because it affects us. So we have to find a way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we are over time, but can I just get another round of applause for these brilliant, brilliant panelists? Thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom and your experiences and your wealth of knowledge with us tonight. And thank you all for attending. I definitely encourage you, we'll do another panel next Thursday at the same time, same place. We'll be focusing on similar themes and grounding it even more thoroughly in this idea of community empowerment and different pathways for navigating the impacts of US imperialism. So please join us if you're able to, and have a beautiful, safe night. Thank you all.